message me your notes. All right. Okay. I mean, it's probably going to take you the rest of the period to do it, yeah. Just checking with Mrs. Hess in the library. Okay, so the next film that we are doing is on the waterfront. Obviously, a lot of these films are my favorite films, but every year I show on the waterfront, I love it more and more. And it's really because I've developed an appreciation for Marlon Brando as an actor. I'd always kind of pigeonholed him into this, like, he's the Godfather, Italian mobster sort of deal. But when you watch him act in this movie, and I think in other movies, you really gain appreciation for how good of an actor he is, and how much he really embraces the style of method acting, which of course is the most popular style of method acting today. So the story is very, very good. There is a ton of symbolism in this movie that I think is very purposeful in terms of how it's directed and how it's edited and that sort of thing. There's obviously a direct correlation historically. What is the historical tie-in to this movie? At least it's more of a backstory, but it's part of it. Yes, Jack. Yes, communism. Okay, expand on that a little bit. Yes.
Well, I thought it was more like a problem with communism, than it's talking about how it's brought these gang bosses are kind of like capitalists.
Yes.
Everything from all of the longshoremen.
Yeah, and you might want to say corrupt capitalists. You know, like although it kind of depends on your view of capitalism, I guess. Yeah. So there's really two distinct. Let's go back to the communism thing. In fact, I'll just go to the next slide here. How does communism and the Red Scare of the 1950s tie into this movie? This was question number 2 that you guys answered.
Wasn't it directly through the director's experiences?
Right. What was the Red Scare? Let's start there. Yes. Or go ahead, Garrett.
Like
Garrett.
McCarthyism, like how people were accused of being communists, and then they had to go on trial against what they were.
Right. So they were interviewed in front of a Senate committee hearing. It was publicized. So in 1950s, early 1950s, so 52, I think was kind of the high point of it. Joseph McCarthy was the senator, and he gained this reputation for trying to ferret out or root out communism from the American government. Because remember, during the Cold War, it was us versus the Soviets in terms of vying for spheres of influence, and if you were a communist, you were considered an enemy. So you had these hearings in which all these people were kind of put on quote-unquote trial, accused of being communists, and then they were pressured into naming other people who were supposed to be communist sympathizers. Yes?
Isn't there a speech in either this movie or the director? I remember in the reading that talked about a speech that kind of correlated with the Red Scare and not even a lot.
Yeah, well, in the reading, it talks about Elia Kazan is the director here, so you're going to want to remember that name. He is the director. And in the 1930s, he actually either he joined the Communist Party or he joined the Communist Party because he was very, very frustrated about where he was in life, didn't feel like he had opportunity and what have you. So when the 1950s roll around and you have this Red Scare, he is one of the people called to HUAC, is the kind of the name of the committee, and pressured to testify. And what does he do when he testifies? You guys remember? Go ahead.
He gives names.
He names names, right? He gets up there and says, yes, I was part of the Communist Party. I'm no longer part of the Communist Party. And he names other people who he knew were communist sympathizers. So some people view this movie as him kind of justifying his action. Because Terry Malloy, who is played by Marlon Brando here, is pressured to, quote-unquote, rat out his friends. So there's a lot of speculation that on the waterfront is kind of Elia Kazan coming out and saying, look, this is why I did it. Arthur Miller, who all of you really should be familiar with because he wrote a lot of famous plays, he is accused of being a communist. And what play does he write in response to being accused? You've probably read it. The Crucible. Have you guys read The Crucible? No, you guys haven't read The Crucible? Okay, you know the Salem witch trials? Okay, The Crucible is about the Salem witch trials. So what's Arthur Miller saying about if he writes in response to the Red Scare, what's he saying about the Red Scare and Joseph McCarthy? He's leading a witch hunt, all right, which it becomes hard to argue against that actually after a while. So that's a really direct correlation. The other historical tie-in, you're right, like this is intended to be a movie that gives you a sense of what it's like to be a longshoreman or someone who works on the docks in New York City, okay, which was not an easy life. So there's that piece of it as well. What's the basic plot of On the Waterfront before we get started? It's important to understand this. Because again, this is another movie that's like Casablanca in terms of they use a lot of words that you might not be familiar with. They use like old slang, and they talk very quickly as well. It's supposed to be kind of this like high impact, heated dialogue through a lot of it. So, what's the basic plot? Go ahead, Gabby.
Well, Terry he's like an ex-fighter.
Yes, he's an ex-fighter.
Not like in the military.
No, like boxer. Yes.
Oh, but okay.
Yes. Yep.
So, and he could have been a contender.
Yes,
and
one of the most famous lines from the movie.
Yeah. And so he like starts kind of like doing things for the mob and for the boss. Friendly.
Yeah, Friendly is his last name, which of course is ironic, right? He's not very friendly. That's again very purposeful. Go ahead, keep going.
And like Friendly sets up this kind of like this murder that Terry unintentionally leads this other guy Joey into, and then so he kills Joey like not intending to, and then Joey's sister kind of like her and Terry, they like become friends, and she like kind of helps him realize like the path that he's going down.
Yes.
And then also like Father
Barry.
Yeah, and so it's just kind of like him.
Okay, so so Terry's kind of caught up in this murder. He does not actually kill Joey, but he's kind of instrumental in having. You'll see how that unfolds. So obviously Joey's sister, okay, who's played by Eva Marie Saint, all right, and Father Barry, they both. What do you think they're going to start to encourage Terry to do? Anybody? If they know that he knows who actually killed Joey, what are they going to want Terry to do? Huh? Yeah, turn him in. Testify, right? Tell on people, right, in the mob. Okay, so a lot of the movie is about whether or not Terry Malloy actually does that and the consequences of that and so on. So, good. What are two hallmarks of the movie? Like two big things. Yeah. Good. Yeah, location. He was determined to shoot this in New York City. Okay, remember, in the studio system, I think one of the characteristics of it is that a lot of it is shot in studio. Okay, and there's a lot of other factors there as well. When you get into, the later 50s, or you start to see things shot more outside the studio. Excuse me, this is an example of that. They actually shoot it down at the docks, which I think helps the movie tremendously. Second hallmark, yes. Yeah, so now you are going to see a departure from technique acting into method acting. All right, particularly with Brando. There's still going to be people in the movie in which you see more technique acting. But I think this is something that I think you're going to appreciate Brando's acting a little bit more. At least I'll try to help you appreciate that if you don't. But it's interesting, Brando and Humphrey Bogart started a movie together. They have two complete different styles of acting, and it's pretty like Humphrey Bogart was like, "You're an idiot." Like he did not appreciate Brando's approach. Brando was like, "So what's my motivation here? What's this character's motivation?" And Humphrey Bogart was like, "I don't. This is a ridiculous form of acting." So it really is a different type of style. Here's an example, and it's a little hard to describe method acting. I have a little clip from my wife in here in which she describes it because she teaches this. But this is the scene that is talked about in the reading that says this is an example of method acting. So Marlon Brando is on the left here. Eva Marie Saint is on the right. Okay, so this is Joey's sister. And he talks about how he handles the glove in this particular scene. So I'm going to let this scene roll.
Marlon calls me to tell me he doesn't.
Except I've got, whoa, what's happening? There we go. Nicholas. Just a little bit of noise. So you detach this. Fixed.
Periodically, Marlon calls me to tell me he doesn't want to be inside the actor's studio because he won't do television. And we talk for 45 minutes. But one on the phone. I'm
going to talk more about this guy later, okay? Lipton is his name. He has a show called Inside the Actor's Studio, and almost every famous actor has been on his show. Saturday Night Live does a fantastic spoof on his show in which Will Ferrell plays him, and is like he's this overly complimentary sort of guy, but we'll get into that. But he is an authority on acting, so he's going to talk a little bit about Marlon Brando and this whole idea of method acting and so on.
Calls, but I was asking, why are you calling me if you don't want to be on it? Anyway, we talk. And at one point he said to me, why do you want me on Inside the Actor's Studio? And I said, do you want an honest answer? He said, of course. I said, because you're the best actor I've ever seen in my life. And I said, I'm not talking about the movie Streetcar and on Waterfront and Viva Zapata. I saw you on stage in Streetcar. I saw you in Truck Line Cafe. I saw you in your first Broadway appearance in I Remember Mama. And I said, during the first act, I was very nervous. All of us were in the audience. I thought, this guy doesn't know his lines. Something's wrong. He's not like the rest of the cast. But no, during the third act, I decided something's going on. This is the beginning of a new kind of acting. That was the first time I saw Marlon Brando.
Both actors were trained at the Actors Studio, which, by the way, Kazan started. And one of the tenets of that sort of training, which is the method as it was derived from the Moscow Arts Theater, started by Konstantin Stanislavski, is that you always do everything as an actor within the given circumstances that you are presented with in the material.
One of the most important aspects of method acting is the attempt to be as real and truthful to the individual self. It's a revolt against layering on some surface element that is somehow not genuine. Another aspect that all schools of the method or the Stanislavski system use are various forms of improvisation. They're very open to the accident of the moment. There is a scene on the Waterfront that illustrates this very well. A scene between Marlon Brando and Eva Marie Saint, where he's walking with her and clearly interested in her, and at some point she accidentally dropped a pair of gloves she was holding. And he picks up the gloves, and before he hands them back to her, he's handling them. He even puts his hand in them. And suddenly this simple little action becomes very revealing of his feelings towards her, some aspects of his own personality, the tough outer guy and the sensitivity within. And when Elia Kazan was questioned about the brilliance of putting this in, he said the only thing I could get credit for was knowing not to call cut when it happened. But he knew Brando would make something interesting of it. And this was his way of working with Marlon Brando. He gave him a lot of credit and invested a lot in his own insights into what he was doing.
Kazan loved the fact that he was doing it on location, on the waterfront. He loved doing things on location because it was real, it was gritty, it was, the weather was terrible. He was glad, actually, that it was so cold because he said it made the actors seem more human. They were freezing cold.
Kazan recognized in Schulberg, and Schulberg in Kazan, the possibility of that kind of collaboration, where Kazan could design a movie as a director that was perfectly crafted to the way in which Schulberg was writing, the way in which he wrote On the Waterfront, that spare but often poetic dialogue. And the result is this nearly perfect motion picture in which there is an absolute harmony between the intentions of the playwright, in this case the screenwriter, the overall direction of the director, Kazan, and the, in the moment, belief of every second, every frame of this film by the actors.
Okay, so any questions on that? Do you understand what method acting is? Yes? Is that clear enough? Again, think about it in terms of just because a technique actor might be like, well, I'm going to get mad, so I'm going to act visibly mad, and do this and whatever, and then only whenever that character is mad, act that way. However, with a method actor realizes that not everybody gets angry in the same way, so they explore that character a little bit more closely, right, and think about, well, maybe this is a person who internalizes anger. Okay, and so when they're angry, they're very, very quiet. So they think a little bit more in terms of motivation. The improvisation piece is, yes, that is another piece that's obviously very key as well. All right, so I think that scene is very interesting where she really, genuinely, she drops the gloves. She was not supposed to drop the gloves, yet Brando stays in character and uses that in the scene, even to a point to tell you a little bit more about his character. That is not scripted. That is on the fly. And it's interesting because, like, they said at the beginning when he was on, on Broadway, like, he'd be up there not really talking, and people thought, oh, he's forgotten his lines, and he can't, he doesn't. But it was more that's how he felt the character would actually talk in the scene. Here's another clip about method acting. It's real short.
Marlon Brando is credited with being the greatest actor of all time. The sheer force of his talent transformed the very idea of what it means to be an actor. In turn, Brando credited Stella Adler. Under the legendary acting coach, Brando actually learned to stop acting. Instead, he dug deep into his imagination and the pain of a traumatic childhood. It was a technique that brought authentic emotion to his performances, particularly in Last Tango in Paris.
My mother was very poetic.
This connection to feeling and memory
it doesn't give it justice.
Is a part of a technique called method acting. Another tenet of this technique is the importance of spontaneity, of acting in the moment. Brando took this idea to its extreme. Instead of memorizing lines, he would put them on cue cards hidden on set.
What the hell's the difference?
Or he would wear a wireless earpiece and have the lines read to him, as he did in A Dry White Season.
Oh, here's one that might please you indeed. His jaw broken, his nose broken, his cheek.
What the? His cheek broken. No good? That's it? It got cut off? Are you serious? There we go.
His eye hanging out and socket and dangling on the crushed cheekbone.
The result is a delivery that feels unrehearsed.
And all that while this man was trying to get out of the window.
Isn't that interesting? So the lines are being read in his ear, and then he says it. So it kind of creates this hesitated delivery that he feels is appropriate for the character that he's playing.
Unlike many actors, the incredible power of his performances wasn't something external. It was built from within. As a result, his inner conflict is glimpsed somewhere beneath his features as tender vulnerability or volatile flashes of emotion barely contained. Nowhere is this more apparent than in this scene from Sayonara, where Brando's character grieves over lost friends. The effect this had on the notion of what acting is was so profound, it lit.
So he's mourning, right? But he's not crying, like terribly sobbing, etc. Again, a little bit of a different take.
Find the craft. So much so that actors today often draw a single line dividing all of film history into two parts: before Brando and after Brando.
And I feel it's a little dramatic. There are other really good actors out there besides Marlon Brando, but he is definitely one of the ones that I think are kind of a tipping point in terms of how people are acting on screen and therefore the kind of impact that a movie has. Just some of the stars of the movie before we get this started. Brando is on the left, playing Terry Malloy. Eva Marie Saint is on the right, who plays Joey's sister. You've got Father Barry there on the right, who plays the priest in the movie. Okay, you have Johnny Friendly on the left-hand side. So he is the mob boss, okay, that is in charge of everything. Terry Malloy's brother is on the right-hand side. He is another key character in this film. And Terry's brother is deeply involved in the mob. Okay, Terry tries to stay out of it. He's kind of involved, but then, he's not. His brother is kind of like the right-hand man of Johnny Friendly. Okay, so you want to keep that in mind. We already talked about that. Okay. Actually, we didn't talk about this. Some concepts to keep in mind as you are watching this movie. All right. On the Waterfront shows the methods employed by corrupt unions to extort money from union members. Okay, so really, Johnny Friendly is in charge of a union of workers on the docks. And so if you're part of his union, all right, he might come up to you and say, hey, you need to pay union dues. You need to pay us money, all right? And Gabby might say, but I don't have the money. So then the next day, Gabby might come to work at the docks, and what do you think is going to happen? Sorry, there's no work for you. You got to leave. All right? So then she might come back the next day, scrounge up some money, and then give me some money and say, hey, here you go. You can go ahead and work. All right, so there's manipulation on the waterfront with that sort of thing. We will start this tomorrow. I keep forgetting that clock's a couple minutes slow. All right, so if you weren't in class today, I'll upload this podcast, and then we will get going.
Podcast.